Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you have found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And I also have my masterclass on nutrition periodization, what it is, and how to do it as well. And that the link to that is in the show notes as well. And then lastly, if you haven't given me a follow on Instagram, make sure you do. Jeff HOEHN _, and that's where I'm most active on social media. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's questions. So the first question I have is how to deal with clients who have cravings specifically at night. So I think with this, it's important to take a proactive approach. I think a lot of times when people ask this question, they're coming at it from a reactive standpoint of, hey, I'm getting these cravings. What do I do now? And I think what we need to do is we need to take that proactive approach. So what do things look like earlier in the day and what do your previous days look like? So we're not only just looking at that day, but we're also looking at the days leading up to it and early on. Because again, a lot of times, hey, I have cravings. What do I do right now? And this kind of brings up a common thing I see. Where these cravings usually come from is this kind of in the fitness world. It's, hey, you need to eat less, you need to move more. And that's good advice. That doesn't work for everyone. And that's not the advice that everyone needs to hear. And so I think this leads to a lot of people, like they get to the point to where they think that eating as few calories as possible or skipping meals to have a lower caloric intake is like something that they need to be doing, right? Oh, that's better. If I drop my calories or I eat less at certain meals, that's good. I'm gonna lose weight. And again, that's where I think a lot of people get themselves into trouble and why they can't stick to maybe the fat loss diets or anything like that for extended period of time, right? Whether that's they get super hungry or cravings are high, it's they're restricting themselves in the short term, and again, they think that's a win, but this usually catches up to them. So again, recently had a client who he was skipping meals and he was trying to go low calories, and for him that felt like a win because it's like, hey, I'm trying to eat less. And again, yes, you do want to eat less, but the trick is making sure you don't overeat, but also making sure you don't undereat because you can't really trick the body. Even if you undereat, it's going to catch up to you and it's going to be challenging. What happened here is somebody skips meals, they skip calories, and so they get super hungry later on, right? So one of the things we can do here and why this happens is that it just leads to excess hunger and cravings, and then it makes it tougher to not overeat. So this leads to cravings. So like maybe somebody's overall like diet for the day or days leading up to it, there's just a lot of holes in it. Again, they might be eating less, and again, that's what they think they need to do. And on paper, yes, but we still want to have a good balance. We still need to make sure we're not under eating too much because that is going to lead to hunger and cravings. Again, you don't get bonus points for going way under your calorie goal. So in this situation, so what I try to work on here is let's look at your days. Are you trying to do this where you're trying to get bonus points for going lower calorie than you need to? If that's the case, then we need to work on that. That's probably going to be something that on the front end we can work on to help reduce cravings. So some tips here: have full balanced meals at least 2 to 3 times per day, spread out throughout your day, and don't just have a focus on eating as few calories as possible. So what's a full balanced meal? So that's going to be a meal that's going to have protein, it's going to have some carbs, it's going to have some fats. It's probably it's mostly whole foods. Maybe there's a little bit of processed, tastier type foods built in. But again, we're having these full meals. We're not having something that is, oh, hey, no carbs in this meal, no protein in this meal, or again, it's 150 calorie snack that you're having multiple times throughout the day. And that's going to lead to excess hunger later on. And I guess another thing you can add onto this too is somebody who hoards their calories, right? Again, I feel like cravings at night, typically it's again, they're trying to eat as little calories as possible. They're skipping meals and they're just trying to hoard their calories for later. But again, that comes with a higher hunger cost. And then it makes it more challenging to manage these foods and probably a higher propensity to want these types of foods. So again, we want to have these balanced meals throughout the day versus just trying to focus on eating as little calories as possible. So again, these balanced meals have that versus having snacks. Again, that's a big mistake I see people make is when they're trying to drop weight. Again, they're trying to go as low calorie as they can, and then their meals are just like meals that, yeah, they're low calorie, but they're not filling you up. You end up being hungry an hour later. And then again, it's hard to moderate your food intake, and it's hard to stick to that if you're just ravenously hungry. Again, we know in the fat loss process, there's going to be some hunger involved, but if you're just constantly hungry all of the time, that's going to be very challenging to stick to. So again, we want to have these full balanced meals throughout the day. Don't just focus on calories, also focus on the quality of food and the food volume of each meal. Again, People often just focus on the caloric intake. Oh, hey, this meal was 350 calories, therefore it was good. But it's like, what was that meal made up of? Again, 350 calories of one meal may be a lot less filling than 350 calories of another meal. That's, again, a nice, full, balanced meal. So we want to start to look at the quality of food, what that balance of those macros are, and we want to make sure the food volume's there. Because, again, you get 350 calories from Oreos, or you could get 350 calories from a nice big salad with a bunch of veggies, a little bit of carbs, and some protein. Which one's going to keep you feeling fuller for longer? So, again, we don't just want to look at calories. Calories tell us a lot, but they don't tell us everything, and we need to dive a little bit deeper than that. Another thing that can be helpful here is stick to a relatively consistent amount of meals per day and around the same time. And the reason I say this is, again, a lot of hunger, a lot of people, a big reason why people give into their diet is because hunger is high. And a lot of the times that comes from this like sense of they just don't have any structure with their nutrition from day to day. They don't really know when they're going to eat again. So it's, yeah, when you get hungry, you're going to want to eat because you don't know, oh, am I going to eat in 2 hours? Am I not going to eat till dinner tonight? Like, there's a lot of questions there. So it's easier to go off a plan. Whereas if you can have, let's say you eat 3 meals per day, and if you can eat those meals at relatively the same time, again, it doesn't have to be the exact, it doesn't have to be 8:17, 12:13, and 6:42. You can have a range here where it's, hey, maybe I eat my first meal between 8 to 10, my second meal somewhere between 12 and 2, and my third meal between 5 and 7. And with that, you just have a general idea of when your meal is going to be next. So that way you can push through that hunger. So let's say it's 3 o'clock, you had your last meal at 12:30. You're like, you know what? I just need to wait 2 more hours till I eat my dinner and I'll be good to go. Versus it's 2:30, whatever time I said, and you're just like, I don't know if I'm going to eat at 7. I don't know if I'm going to eat at 8. And then it just makes it tougher to stick to that because you're like, I'm hungry now, so I'm just going to eat now. So sticking to a relatively consistent amount of meals per day and around the same time can be super helpful there with that. So that's what we need to do on the front end, right? What I think the biggest reason why people have these cravings is because of there's one, they don't have full balanced meals, right? They're just random meals that have random foods in it. So they're probably missing out on some macros, and they're probably missing out on certain essential vitamins and minerals, which is going to spike it. Again, their overall caloric intake is low. So when it's low like that, you are going to taste more tasty foods like that. And then again, not having meal timing structure, not knowing when your next meal is going to be also can set you up for failure there. So that's what we can do on the front end. Now, as far as what we can do in that moment to help with cravings is try to change the state that you're in and try to change it drastically, right? If you're just sitting on the couch and you're hungry, instead of just giving into that right away, change what you're doing, right? Can you go and read for 10 minutes? Can you get up and get some steps in? Can you maybe do some body weight squats? Is there a task that you need to get done? Just do something a little bit different than what you're currently doing. And that can get your mind off of it for a little bit. So then that way you can at least get out of that state of mind for a second and come back to your the conscious level versus just again going off a feeling and not really thinking about what you're doing. So try to change the state there. Again, it can also be like you could do some breath work, something like that. Anything that's just going to get you out of that state of mind and on the different path for at least a little bit. I think it brings you back for a second, and then you can make a more informed decision versus just giving in there with that. Otherwise, you could try and find like a calorie-free beverage, potentially see when your last meal was, like from that standpoint, see what your last meal was, see if you can improve that next time. Hey, was it a little bit more calorie dense versus more nutrient dense? Seeing if you can make a change there with that. So those are the things that we can do on a more reactive standpoint there with that. And then again, I took it from a more proactive standpoint, what we can do leading up to it. And then also, what you can do if you actually get yourself in that situation. Also, don't underestimate the impact of sleep and stress management. So if sleep's off, your cravings are probably going to be a little bit higher. So really focusing on getting some good sleep. And also from a stress management standpoint, if stress is higher, that might be a time where cravings are a bit higher for you, depending on how you've managed stress in the past. With that, also, again, a more proactive approach would be reducing your overall stress, finding better ways to manage your stress as well, too. There with that can be super helpful, and just eliminating any unnecessary stressors with that. So those are some other things that you can do in this situation. Hopefully that was helpful. Now we'll go on to the next question. What should your calorie deficit be to lose body fat and build muscle? So I'm not just going to give you numbers here. I want to dive into this. Okay. I think that this is important to do here to give a little bit more background on this. And saying that first thing, I do go off of body weight percentages per week, but we're going to go back and forth between the calorie deficit and these body fat or these percentages of body weight loss per week there with that. So I think the first thing here is A lot more people have more runway than they think to lose body fat and to build muscle at the same time. I think it's one of those things where people are like, oh, can't do it. I've been training for 2 years. There's no way I can do it there with that. And people have more runway than they think with that. So that's the first kind of point I want to make there. Also, this is a great time to to insert body recomp masterclass. I talk about these things in detail, what your deficit needs to be, how to train, what your lifestyle needs to look like. That's a body recomp masterclass. And then I also have nutrition periodization where I go over the different nutrition phases, fat loss phase, building phase, body recomp phase, and how to set those up as well too. So both of those would be super helpful. So again, people have more runway than they think to do both of these at the same time. First, one study found that trained individuals, and this is from Bearcat et al., they could build muscle in a deficit. But it was important that they, one, lifted weights. So they needed to lift weights in order for that to happen, which makes sense, right? If you want to build muscle, you need to lift weights. They ate enough protein, so they weren't shortchanging protein. They were eating enough. I think 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, maybe a little bit more is good enough there. And they got good sleep in that process. And let me kind of circle back here from the lifting weights standpoint. The training did need to be conducive to building muscle. I think that's super important, right? So we know that even trained individuals, they found were able to have some sort of recomp where they dropped some body fat and built muscle. However, to take this a step further, we're going to continue to take this a little bit further. Another study found that the size of the energy deficit matters in terms of lean body mass gain. Okay. So not only is it like, okay, we know that trained individuals can lose body fat and build muscle or then they can build muscle in a deficit, but we also need to go deeper than that. We need to think, okay, deficits can range from large deficits to small deficits, right? And so what does your deficit need to be in order to set you up to do this? And so there was a meta-analysis and meta-regression from Murphy in 2022, and they found that people were able to build muscle in a deficit. However, a deficit did impair lean body mass gains, and the size of that deficit impacted it as well too, right? So the smaller the deficit, the more likely it was you were able to build some muscle. And as the deficit got larger, that was impaired. And they found that around 500 calories per day was that cutoff point of where, okay, once you get to 500, you're probably not going to build any muscle. And you may be, depending on where you're at, you may be losing some potential muscle. But again, it's hard to pinpoint that exact number. It's just on average, that's where that number was at. Some people may be able to go a little bit higher than that. Some people may not be able to go as high as 500 calories with that, right? That deficit, they may need to go a little bit lower. So really what we found from this was that you don't want to be losing weight super quickly if you're focused on adding some muscle. From a fat loss perspective, yes, you need to be in a deficit. You need to see your weight trend down, but the quicker that the faster you see that happen, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to do both at the same time. And then to again, even go deeper than that, your current body fat levels and muscle mass play a big role. So the leaner you are and the more muscle you have, the smaller your deficit needs to be in order to build muscle. And then eventually at some point, you're going to have to be at maintenance or surplus to add muscle at some point. If you're somebody who has a good amount of muscle, you're like 10% body fat is male, 17% is female, the likelihood of you being in a deficit and building muscle is slim to none, right? However, you take somebody who, let's say for women, they're 30% body fat. They have a little bit of muscle, but not a ton. For men, say they're 18% body fat. They have some muscle, but not a ton. You are going to be able to build muscle and lose body fat at the same time. Again, we need to look at the individual context of that person. Also, as we talked about earlier, things like sleep are going to play a role. Are you eating enough protein? These are also things that need to be there as well too, in order to see both of these happen at the same time. So again, to continue to go even deeper, and like I was just hitting on, your training methods are going to be super important. What are your current training methods? Like just because you're lifting and working out, it doesn't mean that you're lifting in a way that is going to add muscle. And when most clients come to me and they think they need to choose between one or the other, as we dive into it, their training just isn't as conducive as it could be to building muscle. So we have a lot of runway there to improve their training methods with that. So again, your training methods are super important. You could be lifting weights, but if you're just winging it every week, you're just going for the pump. You're not really tracking it. You're not progressively overloading. Yeah, you're lifting weights, but you're not putting yourself in a great position to build muscle there. So again, this goes back to people think that, oh, hey, I'm lifting weights. I've been doing it for a couple of years, and therefore I can't build muscle in a deficit. But are you maximizing what you can do to build muscle with your training methods? All right. So that's the next big thing there with that is what do your training methods look like with that? Okay. Again, we've gone through now, we had the study that showed that, hey, even trained individuals can build muscle in deficit. However, they need it to lift weights, eat enough protein, get enough sleep. And then we know that, hey, the size of the energy deficit is important, right? As the deficit gets larger, it's going to be tougher to build muscle in a deficit. But we also know that body fat levels and muscle mass are going to play a massive role in that too. There's that, the leaner you are, the more muscle you have, the smaller that deficit needs to be if you want to build muscle in a surplus or in a deficit. And you might even need to get to and you will need to get it to maintenance or surplus at some point to continue to do that. And then training methods, right? That's going to be another thing that's going to be important. We need to make sure that our training is conducive to building muscle, and it's not just you're just randomly doing things. So this kind of comes back to what should your calorie deficit be to lose body fat and build muscle, right? So that all leads back to this. So with this, we want to have a small calorie deficit. So again, based on the literature, we don't want to have that deficit that's close to 500 calories per day. So probably closer to 200, 300 calories per day. That's probably going to come around to 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight loss per week. If you're a 170-pound person, you're looking at about 0.8 to 0.4 to 0.8 pounds loss per week, right? So relatively slow. We're not gaining this super quickly. But again, if we go quicker than that, we may be risking not building muscle in that process. So that's good from a fat loss phase perspective, but again, maybe not a lean body mass perspective. Again, that's from a fat loss perspective, that's great. To really have to improve your look and your body composition, you need to build muscle and lose body fat. So we can do both at the same time, but we have to make sure the deficit isn't too large. So 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight loss per week. Now, in saying this, if you're somebody who has high body fat levels and little to no muscle, I think you could push closer to 0.5 to 0.75% of body weight per week, and you'll likely see some muscle growth, fat loss in that process. Okay. Again, this is where the context of the person's super important there with that. Just a few other things that we want to focus on here. We want to lift weights in a way that's specific to muscle growth. So again, training relatively close to failure doesn't mean you need to train to failure every single time, but again, we probably want to be somewhat close to failure. At least we want to be closer to it than we want to be further from it. Train a muscle group on average 2 times per week, train in the 5 to 30 rep range, but most of it being in the 6 to 15 rep range. Good execution techniques, making sure you're controlling the weight. We're not going too slow, but we're not going too quick with it. And again, finding exercises that fit you best and hit the target muscle that you want to. And just having good programming on that. That's how we can make sure our lifting in a way that's specific to muscle growth. Protein at a minimum of 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Carbs probably want to have a minimum of 1 gram per pound of body weight as well. We want to make sure we get enough sleep, and we want to eat overall balanced diet, right? So making sure carbs aren't too low, making sure fats aren't too low, making sure protein's not too low. And we want to have whole foods 80% of the time. That's going to help us with food volume. Make sure that you stick to the calorie balance that we need to. It's going to provide fiber that you need. It's also going to provide vitamins and minerals as well too. So that's where these whole foods can be super helpful. Lastly, at some point, your results are going to slow down and you need to take periods of time focused on gaining muscle or periods of time just focused on losing fat. So we're not going to be able to recomp forever, right? As you get leaner, more muscle you have, the more you're going to have to switch to a more fat loss, muscle gain approach where you're focused on just one at one time. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that gave you a little bit more insight into how to body recomp and what that deficit needs to look like. All right, so last question of the day. Good strength base, but struggle with one pull-up, just need to get leaner. So I think, again, to go back to what we just talked about, I don't think it would be a bad idea to do a combo of muscle gain and fat loss, right? I would imagine that part of it is, yeah, you probably need to drop some body fat and whatnot, but I don't think it would hurt to build muscle, right? Because that's only going to make you stronger. But in saying that, yes, being lighter is definitely going to help you get a pull-up. You have less weight to pull up. So yes, getting leaner is going to be helpful there. But again, some muscle growth in that process is going to help because you'll be stronger. What I like to do in these situations, I like to have clients use the assisted pull-up machine, as this is going to, one, help them get in enough volume, not to not only build muscle and get stronger, which we talked about is important, but to also practice good pull-up technique. If you don't have an assisted pull-up machine and you're just trying to do body weight pull-ups, it's like your struggle there is going to be good technique and getting in enough volume to get the right technique for pull-ups. So I like to have clients use assisted pull-up machines for that reason, as it helps them really get that technique dialed in from that perspective. I also think working on doing some pull downs as well would be super helpful, right? So just working on some pull downs, because that's going to be a vertical pull where you go overhead and pull weight down. It's going to be very similar to a pull up. It is slightly different in terms of, obviously, you're pulling your body weight up versus pulling weight down, but it is very similar. So just continue to get stronger with those vertical pulls, but a stronger, more muscular back, upper back and lats will certainly help. So again, just continuing to focus on building muscle, training your back in a way that's going to build muscle, right? That's certainly going to help. I think most people do a kind of poor job of back training there with that, whether that be they don't do a combination of rows and pull downs. They don't focus on, they focus on pulling, but maybe they don't bias it towards upper back and lats. It's just focused on like upper back. So having a combination on there with that can be super helpful in order to build your back. So that's what I would do there to get a pull up. And that's it for today's episode. If you guys have any questions like this that come up, maybe you want to know what your macro split needs to be. Maybe you need to know what phase of training you need to be in, what phase of nutrition you need to be in, how do you manage hunger, how many sets to do per week. If these questions sound too familiar, then then I have something for you. You can click the link in the show notes to book a free 30-minute strategy call, and we can talk about a plan that speaks to your needs and sets you on the path to reaching your goals and to answer any questions you have there with that. So again, that's a free 30-minute strategy call to get you moving forward with your goals. And again, the link to that is in the show notes there with that. Lastly, you can just DM me any questions you have, DM me on Instagram. You can always reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any questions there. So if you have any questions around coaching, anything I talk about on the podcast, just reach out to me on there and I will get back to you as quick as I can. So that's it for now. I will talk to you guys next time.